Hello and welcome back to the game room. You know what I love? Video games. You know what I love talking about? Games. And it seems like a lot of people these days who cover games seem to hate them. Or at least the people who play them. Well, that's not me, and that's not the 1930 of you beautiful people checking out this video here today. My goodness, we have another record week for the channel. We are 70 subscribers away from 2,000. Last week's video blew up and had a lot of great comments, even some people challenging me on what I knew would be some controversial takes. So hey, please, I'm not the be-all end-all. We all have our own opinions. And once again, let me remind you that a lot of these games, like we're doing the part 2 this week, are still good. They're just not as good as the one that preceded it. So let's jump into some more games that I think you can ignore and stick with the first one. Let's check it out. There's a lot of games out there, some of which you've never even heard of. That's where I come in. My name's Luke. I've been playing games since the age of 2, and I have no life.
This is my game room.
So let's start this off with another one that is a recent entry that I just was not very impressed with, and that is SpiderMan 2. Now, I haven't played the Miles Morales game, but I did play the first Spider-Man, and I really did enjoy it. Now, I think it was a little overblown with how great it is. You know, it's a solid 8, but as far as this game goes, I feel like it was a step back. I did not enjoy the story. I thought jumping between two Spider-Men could have been handled much better. The whole symbiote storyline, as always happens when you try and cram this all into a single movie or a single game, just does not have the time to breathe. Kraven is not a very interesting big bad, and it's just, there's too much going on. Even though the first game had the Sinister Six, and it seemed like some of that, like once you built the Sinister Six, then suddenly you defeated 2 of them immediately. So it really did feel like they didn't last that long, but especially in this game with them having major villains get killed off screen, a big time gap. Even without playing Miles Morales, it just seemed like it was skipping around and really trying to accelerate. Everyone knows the identities of Peter Parker, everyone knows the identities of Miles Morales, and it's just not very exciting. And was not a great game, in my opinion. I know they're going to be making a third game. We'll see what that ends up being, but as far as this game goes, stick with the original, because I was not all that impressed. Now, here's one that was shocking to me because I didn't even know this game existed back in the day. So I loved Double Dragon 1, but it was only one player on the NES. So Double Dragon 2 was the piece de resistance. It was amazing. You could play it with you and a friend. When you get to the end of it, you then have to turn on each other and the ultimate just, oh my goodness, if you could make it to the end, if you get past the jumping section. Well, lo and behold, there was a Double Dragon 3 for the NES. I was not even aware of this. And lo and behold, other than the Bimmy and Jimminess of it, it only gives you 1 life. Now, you pick up additional characters, but the additional characters have movesets that aren't great. So, all in all, it is just a big step back from the first, or not even the second game. And I'm not quite sure why they did that. I don't know exactly when it came out, but it is just not, it is not great. It is by far one of those NES sequels that you never hear about, and there's good reason for it. So definitely don't waste your time on the third one. Stick with the first one if you're by yourself, or if you have a buddy, stick to the second one. Now, I don't have a physical copy of this game, much like when I spoke of Curse of the Moon last week. I am not a fan of Ori and the Will of the Wisp compared to Ori and the Blind Forest. And here's the reason why. Ori and the Blind Forest was a very interesting take on the Metroidvania formula in a world where you don't have an active combat. So your little character, little white wispy character, doesn't directly attack anything. You avoid, you have aerial acrobatics, and then you have an automatic attack that takes care of damaging enemies for you. And I found that to be a very interesting gameplay loop, as well as I thought the accelerated nature of the game itself. It's about a 6 to 12 hour game. Nice sweet spot for that kind of game, in my opinion. Was really nice. Now, when Ori Will of the Wisp comes out, it wraps up the story. It's much darker in tone, very much influenced by Hollow Knight. So it almost takes, I would say, 50% of the Hollow Knight mechanics and implements them. So now Ori, instead of being an acrobat who has a little thing that attacks for her, is now damaging with a sword. And it pretty much plays more like a sequel to Hollow Knight than it does a sequel to Ori and the Blind Forest. And I just didn't find that all that great. It's still a very good game. It's still fun to play. And it wraps up the story in a way that is almost depressing. I would tell people, maybe if you like the way the first game ends, do not play the sequel because it's not getting any happier. And as depressing and bittersweet as the end of the first game can be, at least it ends it on a note of hope. Whereas it does end it on a note of hope for the second one, but it's just a little too depressing in my opinion. And because they changed the combat so much, and then because they changed it to be more of a Hollow Knight light, I found it to be less interesting, less enjoyable, and kind of a bummer, because it was a very interesting take for a game with a combat style you don't see much. And instead it removed what was unique about it, and it still has the great visuals and the great emoting and the emotion of the music. All that's wonderful. But it removed some of what made it special, in my opinion, by just copy pasting what made another great game special in its own right. Now, here's one that was mentioned in the comments last time that I wasn't even thinking of, but yeah, I gotta throw it out there. So I'm not talking about Chrono Cross, though, because I haven't played it, so I can't really speak to that. So I can't really attest to that. A lot of people will say that it doesn't stand up to Chrono Trigger, but this is Chrono Cross, the Radical Dreamers edition. And the Radical Dreamers, for those who don't know, was almost like a visual novel or a story-based conception for Chrono Trigger as a sequel. And it really is, it's cool and all, as far as a little footnote, and I'm glad we finally got an official release here in the West. But when I remember when I was looking at all these Japanese ROMs of SNES games, and I saw something Chrono Trigger, The Radical Dreamers, I'm like, oh my god, there's a sequel to Chrono Trigger? Like, there's a sequel to Secret of Mana? Not really. Not really. You can skip that one. There's not much content. There's not much to it. It is purely a footnote. But if you go in and expect something great, you're going to be disappointed. Okay, now here's one, speaking of being disappointed, that was a sequel to one of my favorite games on the Switch, one of my favorite games of 2017, a fantastic year. And unfortunately for me, they decided to make it a little bit more, I guess, mainstream or mass appeal to an audience that doesn't really exist. And that was Mario Rabbids The Sparks of Hope. Ubisoft, in all its wisdom, decided to divert the series away from being an XCOM light, which I loved as someone who loves XCOM, and they tried to make their own mark on the style, allowing you more free range movement, adding more active elements into the game, and it didn't work. I found that whereas the first game had a lot of strategy in what kind of secondary functions, as far as the ink versus the bounce versus the fire you would have on your weapons, how you would approach a scenario, how you would attack. It removed all that. Most all the enemies in Sparks of Hope are melee based, so they don't take cover. If you shoot them, they charge you, which there were some enemies like that in Mario Rabbids Kingdom Battle, but far and few between compared to this game. In this one, you have the Bob-ombs, you have the Goombas, you have the big cat dudes, and I'm missing a few, but they're just everywhere. None of them take cover, and it makes more sense to worry less about being in cover and just try and kill the enemies as quickly as possible. Which you're trying to do in Kingdom Battle as well. It is not as well executed, in my opinion, and I was really not enjoying playing it for a long time. I did, at the very end of it, turn around on it to where I did enjoy the game at least, but for a long time there, it was very, very difficult, and one of those things where, like I said in my initial comments on it, had the first game played like this, I might be a little bit less harsh, because, for instance, I recently beat Persona 5 Tactica, which is another game that, whoa, the storyline I could not care less for. I just skipped all of it altogether, but the actual combat was much more like Sparks of Hope, but with better nuances to it. They had a triangle fire you could use. There was the ability to get a secondary turn. So had they done something like that, which was very engaging with Sparks of Hope, I would have been into it more, but it was not engaging, it was not interesting, and I didn't like it. Because it stripped back what I enjoyed. Now, speaking of XCOM, this is what I'm talking about with this video. So this one is a great game, but I like XCOM 1 more than XCOM 2. And also we're talking about War of the Chosen. I think it goes too far. So it removes the 4 classes you had in XCOM 1 and replaces them with 4 almost identical classes, but just a little bit different. And then they really push the pace a lot, in my opinion. And it's kind of that 50-50 rate where you don't want to be, like, you want to be constantly challenged as the game is going on, but it also, sometimes you just want to enjoy sort of your tactical prowess and your strategy. And XCOM 2 really pushes the envelope so much harder in some way, especially if you're doing War of the Chosen, the DLC, which integrates into the main game and makes it almost like a XCOM 2.5, much like XCOM Enemy Within versus XCOM Enemy Unknown does that. Though I've never played Enemy Within, I have played the campaign of XCOM 2, the normal one, and War of the Chosen. And where it is interesting to note, I still prefer the normal campaign of XCOM 2. But back on that, I think the original XCOM 1 is a superior game. And it's one of those things where I think they did too much. There's too many different divergent paths. You have too much you have to balance. Like, yeah, I get it. The whole point of these games is that you're always going to be behind the 8 ball, which I don't mind, but it just wasn't as good. And so I'd say if someone wants to try one or the other, start with the first one. That's my opinion. Now, here's an opinion that I still hold that was not a controversial take back in the day, but as we get further and further from that day, it seems to be getting more and more controversial, and that is Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. It's not that I can't stand this game. I feel like over the years, my dislike of the game has grown exponentially as I keep hearing from people saying that it's amazing, it's the best Zelda game, it's the greatest tone, it's so good. Because I just don't see it. And, it's not that I'm completely against timer-based games. I love the Pikmin series. But I really dislike games where the timer will reset your progress. And that's how Majora's Mask feels. Yes, you get items, you get masks, you get things, but it's very much time-gated to the point of where you have to be in the right spot at the right time. If you mess it up, you gotta go back and reset the whole thing. When you beat a dungeon, that dungeon does not stay beaten, which I find that to be one of the biggest travesties. I couldn't tell you how annoyed I was when I found that out when I played it back in the day. And it is interesting, too, that it is using all the Ocarina of Time assets and everything. But my favorite part of Ocarina of Time was playing as Adult Link. But instead, you're playing as Child Link the whole time. And turning into the Goron, turning into the Zora, turning into the little dude who shoots the pellets was not as much of a breath of fresh air or something I really enjoyed. Now, the ending, if you get all the masks and you unlock the Link that's like true adult Link, like in his late 20s Link, that was super cool, and we've never seen anything close to that since. So that for Majora's Mask is really cool, but as something that I'd want to go back and play again, I just have no desire. Though, to be honest, I feel like I should, because so many people are so high on this game, and maybe I'd appreciate it more, but it really is one of those instances of it was a good game when it came out, but the praise it gets now, almost that makes me want to dislike it more. Because it was like, it's like people hating on the N64 controller. Like, bro, did you even use it back in the day? No one complained about it. Everyone was so shocked that there was a joystick with a digital pad, and the C button sometimes could use. Anyways, I get off on a tangent. All right, now here's one where no one is going to say that the original is not better. At least I don't think so, and that is Actrazer II. So the original Actrazer was a perfect meld of a game that had a simulation mixed with an action platformer, and it's one of those things where it doesn't sound like it would work, but it works so well. It was an original release, or an early release on the SNES. It had some banging music. The first song in Actrazer is one of my favorite songs in gaming, and unfortunately never appears again in the game, but at least it really gets you pumping and ready for the story. But just that dichotomy of, in a really tough, because it's not a perfect action platformer. It's definitely got some warts. In the end of the game, when you go through and you have to beat the gauntlet, is not perfect. But we're talking about the second one. So the second one removed all that. So the second one, you don't have that sim part, because freaking Enix of America told them not to do it. So they just made a straight action platformer and made it balls hard. And while it looks amazing visually, there's just not much. there's no breaks. Sometimes that respite between levels going into the simulation is needed so that you can get your bearings, you can take a breath. We got the frustration, we got the trial and error part out. Let's do something that's a little bit more relaxing. That's a very good way to balance a game, in my opinion. And it's why when you're playing RPGs and they're sectioned off in lands, or when you're playing a platform and it's sectioned, it's like you get to an end castle, you beat it, and then you get to the next world and you have a couple of cakewalk levels before they ramp up again. Whereas Actrazer II is just, you're always constantly at 10, so it wears on you. And that's why that one, unfortunately, is nowhere near in the same sphere as the first one, and why Enix of America went bye-bye because of decisions like that, and we didn't get great games like Terranigma. So even more reason to dislike Enix of America. Now here's one that this one still pisses me off. It's a good game. It's a good game, don't get me wrong. And unfortunately it was the last good game in the series, but that is BanjoKazooie. And really it's just because of the stupid swap and save stuff with the ice key and the eggs and the other mysteries from the first BanjoKazooie that seemed to be set up for something great, and then it ended up being nothing. You know, it's like people who I would imagine I was invested in Lost, don't get me wrong, but between season 1 and 2, when I found out that Desmond was in the hatch, that then told me, like, oh, okay, I need to temper my expectations here. They really don't know what they're doing. Let's just enjoy this, and let's check out Josh Holloway's awesome Southern accent. And that kept me there. But with BanjoKazooie, I was so ready for them to be like, okay, I'm gonna go back into the old game and get the ice key, and then somehow it's gonna transfer over here, and this is gonna blow my damn mind. I'm so excited. And then it was just, oh yeah, you go into a room, you get a collectible. Okay, it didn't really do anything. Yeah, and there's another egg. Oh, and here's some stuff you didn't even know were supposed to be in BanjoKazooie. Okay. And then finding out years later that I was almost close with, you had to use the washing machine to pound the thing in the Goji Desert level to then open up the ice. But then you get it and nothing really happens. Anyways, that feeling is why I'm colored on this game and why it still disappoints me to this day. Now, here's another one. Speaking of PlayStation exclusive sequels, so Horizon Forbidden West was such a letdown compared to Horizon Zero Dawn, in my opinion. The beginning of the game where you meet the big bad who turns out to not be the big bad, and really just the whole plot seems aimless until you find the big central hub. But by that point, you're probably 5 or 10 hours in the game, and I didn't find any of the dialogue interesting. Aloy's journey is not nearly as riveting as it was in the first game, as you were finding out what happened to this world and how it came to be, and like, oh, this is actually, oh my god, this is why it is this way, and there were no big reveals with that. Instead, it was just more of the same. Even after the conclusion of the game, where you get this, you get this Deus Ex Machina space people that show up out of nowhere who have advanced tech, and then you have clones, and it really jumps the shark in a way that I was not expecting and I did not like. And it's kind of like, I would say it's akin to Westworld, where the first season of Westworld was incredible, but then they want to do that same level of reveal for Westworld seasons 2, 3, and 4, and it just doesn't work. And the same thing happened here with Horizon Forbidden West, in my opinion. And I just didn't find the combat as engaging. I didn't find it. I don't know what it was. Maybe it's because it was 5 years later, and we've been trying that style of game so much. You know, it's kind of what I was talking about with Red Dead 2. It's why I'm not such a fan of Red Dead 2, is because I'd played 6 or 7 games that had that feel. And yes, while the immersion and the photorealism was incredible, it's one of those things where, you know what, I don't want to have to worry about cleaning up after my horse's droppings because it's realistic. I not that you do that in the game, but that's kind of what I'm talking about. And Horizon Forbidden West just was not nearly as interesting, and that was unfortunate. All right, getting down to the last few here. So this is one that it's not that it's a bad game, but the first game was so good. It was after Metal Gear Solid came out, and there was a ninja game called Tenchu that I loved. And Tenchu II was supposed to take everything from the first game and take it to 11. You would have day missions. There was a third playable character, a map creator, which I think the first one might have had too. But yeah, so I was stoked for it. And it came out, and it was all right. but it really leaned into the supernatural elements that I was not a huge fan of in the first game, almost from the offset. Whereas I enjoy, and that's why I like to a point, I enjoyed the Assassin's Creed series, because even though it had myths and monsters and all this stuff in the background with like the golden apples and all the kind of, like the aliens and stuff, it still was just you fighting other humans. Whereas in Tenchu, you started actually fighting like Japanese demons, which I know is like a whole thing in their culture because they're in all these type of samurai and ninja games. I mean, look at Onimusha, Ghost of Tsushima. All that stuff always like comes up eventually. Trek to Yomi. But yeah, with Tenchu 2, it just kind of was just a letdown. It wasn't one of those things where I was really excited for it and I played it, and it just kind of like the way the Tomb Raider series got stale and the Twisted Metal series got stale. Tenchu 2 was like that, and it just wasn't as much fun. So stick to the first one. Even though Tenchu 2 is better, it's kind of like Medal of Honor Underground. It's not. Sometimes the flaws make the game better, in my opinion. All right, getting down. Here we got another one, Condemned 2 Bloodshot. So I was recommended to play the Condemned series from a friend, and I picked up the second one when I should have picked up the first one because the second one was just not all that great. At least I've heard. I've heard the first one is still worth getting. I picked it up recently, so that'd be something I would definitely want to check out. And then the last one we're going to talk about is Super Smash Bros. Brawl, which after Melee, how are you going to follow up Melee? In this game, it gave the tripping ability. It seemed, even though you could use the GameCube controller, it just didn't feel as nice. I was a Marth main, and they took away his high arc and replaced it with a stab, and then the ability to do the combo was made a little easier. The Subspace Emissary was incredible, but everything else about the game was a letdown. And then when Smash 4 came out, there really is no reason to play Smash Bros. Brawl. In fact, I still have it sealed. Because I never ended up opening it. Everyone had this game back then, and I didn't own a Wii. But yeah, that one was a disappointment. Stick to Melee or go to Ultimate. But yes, there you go, guys. There is another gaggle of games that I say you can ignore. Stick to the one before it. Stick to the originals. As a reminder, I release a new video every Tuesday. I do have some ideas in the works here. So there are channel memberships live now for Game Roomies. I think I'm going to put in a like early access for videos. I don't really know. Let me know what kind of perks you guys would want. What are you even interested in? There's emotes and all that, which we'll get to do once I figure out my streaming situation, which I'm working on. We might even have some guests in there, so it's not just me. But yeah, exciting things on the channel, guys. We're so close to 2,000 subs. I can't believe it. January has been nuts. Let's keep going. Let's keep rolling. I love every single one of you. Thank you guys for subscribing. Thank you for checking out. Hello to all the new subscribers. Welcome. Like I've noticed that if I reply to every comment that it kills my algorithm, which is one of those weird things of YouTube. So if I don't reply to your comments, just know I am reading them and I appreciate it. But I'm really trying to... I've been, like I said in one of the responses last week, I've been on YouTube since 2009, and I've gotten no traction, and it seems like I finally have hit something here, so let's keep rolling, and thank you guys all for joining me on this journey. All right? It's so nice getting a hold of you. Take care.